Off-grid is always the way to be if possible. I think of this in the tower as the fronts of the last few days accumulate, feeling compelled to move along with them over the scarp inland. When the heat comes, it too can disconnect people from the grid. There is nothing stranger than trying to make a home where one unbelongs, where one can't ultimately fit. We don't believe in possessing, in property per se, but we do believe in the right of all people to be homed and to be allowed to feel home. Home is not about theft or dispossessing. It's about a right to respectfully coexist and to define small-scale interactions against the backdrop of the larger world. Interestingly, the Mennonite women who ran the health store in Mount Vernon, though not vegans themselves, understood where we were coming from, and in supporting our needs, they expanded the possibility of home. Difference for them wasn't alien, but part of present.
Welcome to the Good Reading Magazine podcast, sponsored by Pantera Press. Good Reading is a monthly magazine dedicated to books and reading and aims to help readers discover their next favourite book. You can find out more about the books discussed on today's podcast at goodreadingmagazine.com.au.
Welcome back to the Good Reading Podcast. I'm Max Lewis, and today we're joined by Western Australian poet, writer and activist John Kinsella, whose new book, Displaced, A Rural Life, is a reflection of belonging and unbelonging in rural Western Australia. John, thanks so much for joining us today.
Oh, great to be with you, Max.
And so you've just returned home from some time spent overseas, including a certain event in Zurich. What were you doing over there?
Yeah, well, that was interesting. That was the big protest against the World Economic Forum, and I did my own, as I often do, little side street protest against rapacity, basically, against greed, against world capitalism. But yeah, we were over there for a couple of months, and I was doing research work for a book on issues relating to land degradation, how people are reusing land. You know, obviously, I want the land returned to safer ecologies, be turned into nature reserves, these kinds of things. But often with these old development sites, what they're actually doing is they're sort of putting layers over the top and building new developments. So I was looking at those things in Ireland, a little bit in Britain, but especially in Switzerland, where it's very relevant to the lake cultures. Interestingly and bizarrely, where I was mainly working, there's a controversial case going at the moment around Roger Federer.
Really?
Because he's building this huge lakeside, on Lake Zurich lakeside kind of mansion with tennis courts and that on an old brickworks site. And so there's a process of land. They're removing, I think, the top 90 centimetres of land because of contamination. And God knows where they're getting the fill from to replace it on the slope.
Yeah.
But it's controversial because he's blocking out the path around the lake so people can't access the waterfront. So that's a classic kind of brownfield/greenfield site rehabilitation issue.
And that all ties into talking about Displaced, which isn't your first autobiographical book. You've previously written Auto and Fast Loose Beginnings. What did you want to do differently with Displaced?
Well, this is a totally different book from those. Those books are really about a personal journey and about basically collections of my personal failings, which are many, put into context of other people. This is about family in many ways, people I live with, but in essence, it's actually about how you can or can't or try to have a relationship with place. In this case, it's largely rural Western Australia, but it's also very much rural Ohio over a 5-year period, and rural Ireland over a 3 or 4 year period. But primarily, it's a relationship to the rural world and to the non-urban world. When we lived in Ohio, we lived in a village called Kenyon, small college village, and then we lived in Mount Vernon, which was a larger town. I think it's about 25,000, maybe it's 20, maybe it's 15, but it's in that kind of range of people, number of people. It's a small town, not very small, but a smallish town in rural Ohio. that has very rural, conservative values. I live in the rural, and my partner lives in the rural, and my son lives in the rural, and we have radicalised left politics, peaceful radicalised left politics. And how do we coexist in these really conservative environments? What role can we have in them, and what role do we make for ourselves, and what sort of alienations come up? So this memoir is about that. And I think fundamentally how, as someone who strongly believes, which I emphatically do, that land should be returned in Australia on a very large scale to Indigenous people, with Indigenous people, Aboriginal people, making the decisions over how people then interact with that land and how we all coexist and share, but the decision process being mediated through Aboriginal communities rather than through white male power structures in Canberra. How do we talk about that? How do we have a relationship with place when you feel that way? And this book kind of spends a lot of time trying to work through all those issues and trying to work out if there is a way. And I do believe there is a way. I think it's called dialogue. I think it's called respect. And I think it's called, basically affection for your fellow humans, whomsoever they are and wherever they come from. I mean, we're all people, and we need to talk and we need to respect each other. And that's what this book is about, place through personal respect.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about the form of the book a little bit, because it's quite similar, I guess, to your previous book, Hollow Earth, which I believe you referred to that as cascading vignettes or something like that.
Exactly.
It's like little chunks of, I guess, mini essays or something like that.
Well, I think that's exactly right. I mean, the thing about it is it was written, interestingly, in two big long rushes of over basically a year. They were like continuous rather than broken up. But what actually happened when I went through to do the editing and the remix, if you like, I've been working with an American editor, Jill Belosky, who gave me a lot of feedback, and she was saying that interestingly, though it was written like that, it had the episodic feeling, and she thought with some rearrangement it could you could really highlight that and develop it. Then my editor, who I worked with on the book, Penelope Goods, who's a superb editor, she also went back and she liked the episodic nature of it, and she thought that also it had that narrative flow and the two could be merged more, and she had a big input on that. So what we ended up with was that vignette-ish kind of feel, sort of like mini analysis and interactions with different places over a period of time, but woven together in such a way is that you can move back and forth through time and place. So it tells a number of stories at the same time. So it's telling the story of right now as it's being written and what you're seeing out the window literally, but then it's flashing back to, say, living in Ohio, or it's flashing back to living in Ireland, but then suddenly you can actually be in Ireland or Ohio almost looking forward. So that kind of almost time slip approach and that cascading vignette was exactly, of course, this is concurrent, the writing of this with Hollow Earth was written over many, many years and ended up being, revised into that kind of book from something larger narrative. But this book, the thinking that was going on in writing this was done at a similar time and overlapped strongly with Hollow Earth. So there is a relationship between the two texts stylistically. And consciously too. So I appreciate you bringing that up. The language usage and the concerns. I mean, Hollow Earth is a novel deeply concerned with rapacity, damage, the kind of brutality of the mining industry and capitalism. And this is a personal life interaction with place that's also concerned with those things, and how you can talk about it with people, and often how you can talk about it with the very people inflicting the damage, and come out the other end, intact in some way.
Yeah, absolutely.
About negotiation and conversation.
It said a lot about your, I guess, relationship with memory and place, in how the little vignettes set in the past are still in first-person present narration. Yeah,
I've always been fascinated by where we sit in a narrative as a reader. And when someone's working in, first person, obviously there's going to be that kind of shared intimacy with the reader. But also I'm fascinated by the way, tense changes and shifts and takes us into different places. Once again, as with Hollow Earth, this memoir is all about the relationship with the reader. And you've got to be, when you're talking about a lot of issues, which I do, you've got to be careful not to actually just, get into that telling mode. You have to invite the reader to participate and to take what they want and leave what they want, because it's their life too, and they want to have their life as they read. They don't want to have my life, and I wouldn't want to inflict or impose upon them myself as such. So though it's personal, obviously memoir is, it's also a conversation with the reader. So there are intimacies and distances that take place in the work that are all about, if you and I were sitting in the room and wanting to have a yarn like we're doing now, it'd be much like we are having literally now. And if let's say we had very different opinion about something, well, we'd talk through it and we'd illustrate it with experiences from our own lives and say, well, this is what I felt when I did this. And the book tries to capture that feeling at the same time as, I guess, it's got sort of more essayistic information at times, because I'm a collector of detail and information, and I like sharing it with people. So if I observe something that I think is relevant, that detail will come in. So you'll get more detailed sections that are observational, where in a sense I'm almost distanced from, because I'm relaying information, and then we go back to the conversation.
And on that conversation, a lot of the book is made up of both past and present experiences of people in Western Australia's, I guess, reactions and attitudes to your more left-wing, progressive, very almost anarchist, I guess, lifestyle.
Yeah.
But at the same time, there's a lot of points where you have conversations with people, and you
I love people.
Dialogue.
This is the thing. People are great, Max. I mean, this is it. Even, look, people that you prefer, and look, honestly, there are not that many people that I come into contact with who would agree with, 50%, if more, of what I say. But, I have found in my life, and I've met many extremes of people, is that if you can engage on a personal level and have respect for them as humans, as intact entities, if you like I'm an intact entity, that they have agency and that, they've got the rights that you've got, then you work something out. And if they feel like I'm an intact entity and I've got rights as well, then we can get somewhere. Where you have problems, and I have had problems, and some of them are noted in the book, is where there's such an attitude of hate that doesn't matter what you try and do and say, look, we can find some common ground. There's only a kind of combative, almost violent, and often literally violent response. And you can't get past that. That's very difficult to deal with when someone's just overtly violent and full of hate, especially racist hatred or misogynistic hatred, or that kind of, or a kind of general identity hatred, where they feel that someone's difference is so overwhelming to them that they can never, ever find common ground. Well, I don't believe that's ever the situation. I will always try, even if I'm in a protest or something. I've argued with many legal enforcement officer, if you like, over my life. I've also had many conversations with them about, for example, I remember at one protest where I was there was an asbestos contamination risk, and I was talking to one of the officers and saying, the thing is, you're putting yourself at risk doing this. You have a union, you should be using it, and saying that, you might not agree with we, the protesters, but surely you have a family or, friends or people that you go home to and you're covered in asbestos dust and you've just had to stand there because you're told to stand there. That's not right, is it? And, eventually you see a light shine and get through and something at some point in their life they'll say, we shouldn't have to do this. This is wrong. And so there are funny little overlaps. And to me, it's all about those overlaps rather than about the massive differences. And, that's how you can live in a community, a relatively conservative community. And, something goes wrong, a neighbour you might politically disagree with, you're both out there trying to fix the situation, and you're both camaraderie, you're both working together, you see the best and the worst in each other, and then you go back to being, separate again because you're so different. But it's an interesting thing how crisis And, as a lot of Australia experiences, especially with, the massive impacts of human-induced climate change, if we don't find community and we don't work together, we all go. And I suppose part of the message of this book is, though I'm incredibly different, though I irritate a lot of you, people don't believe a lot of these things, and I understand that. But there's no reason why we can't work together with equal passion and care and try and make something better. So, that's in a nutshell the philosophy behind the book, and it's the philosophy behind the way I try and live my life as well.
You've done some quite drastic protests, including standing in front of bulldozers and that kind of thing. But you also maintain in the book that protesting isn't simply demonstrating in public, but it's also a changing of your habits and your impact on the world.
Max, that's the major thing. It's easy to go, it's not easy, but it's in some ways easier to go and, stand with a group of people. Or even in my case, I'm often standing on my own in protest with a sign just standing there and, making my statement. I mean, I am, protest is an ongoing part of my situation. That's what I do. I will be in London and I will... as people can find on various YouTubes and things people have taken over the years, be standing, on the Thames outside the Tate Modern, reading a peace poem during the time of, the so-called coalition's bombing campaign against Syria, and I'm reading a peace poem there, and it's being recorded. And that's an active protest as much as marching. Marching is important too, but the actual use of poetry and art to do that, to me, is an ongoing thing and can't be separated out. But in the end, probably the most important thing is exactly how we live. If we are less consumerist, which is probably my prime drive in all things. I mean, I buy things. Everyone buys things.
Everyone has to buy things, yeah.
Yeah, and I'm not saying that you can't, in the world as it's constructed, certainly in Australia and Western countries and many other non-Western countries, I might add too, is that that basic dynamic has been long in place and it's very hard to get around. You can minimise it though, and you can not just buy an object for the sake of buying an object because it's fashion, or buying an object because you've got to keep up to date, or many innumerable other reasons like that. You can be less consumerist. Being less consumerist is probably the most decisive thing in terms of less damaging environmental impact. And using public transport where it's possible. Sometimes it's not, but on and on the list goes. They're micro decisions that we make every single day on how we interact with the biosphere. And I suppose my argument in the end is none of us are perfect. Some of us are very far from it. But any gestures we make are cumulative. And you've got billions of people making micro gestures in terms of their relative capabilities and what their obligations and situations are. It does make a difference. And when you come to, I'm a person that believes in the redistribution of wealth. I don't believe people should have, vast wealth. I think it should be shared. I do not believe that the mining billionaires should have that money. I do not believe it. I think fundamentally the idea of the rich philanthropist who can buy policy by giving money and manipulate public opinion and manipulate even educational institutions and so on by donating money that's largely got from stealing from Aboriginal people and damaging the earth and feeding the decay of the biosphere. I think that's wrong, and I do. I don't think that. I think they should have the right to life like all of us. I'm not trying to say otherwise, and they should be respected as people as much as anyone else should be respected as a person. But one does not respect their wealth or power and the way they got it, and it should be not the case. I strongly feel this. And if the very rich, rapacious people had less, that would be already a good journey, I think, to go on in terms of lessening the impact, especially the consumerist impact on the world. But, they're the kinds of opinions said peacefully and as a pacifist that very much upset people. As soon as you mention redistribution of wealth and that the poorest should have the same amount as the richest, then we should all have equal share because it's all stolen from the planet in one way or another. And if it's not stolen, then people are living in a good relationship with the earth and they're taking and giving at the same time, which is surely how we should live with the planet rather than just taking. So they're the kind of opinions that I just gave you that tend to cause some irritation when I'm talking with people. But, it's not meant in an aggressive or confronting way even. Or confronting, it is meant to be confronting. It's not meant to be in a way that's threatening. Certainly not threatening. It's a way of trying to open people to a different kind of conversation of how we can be, mutually benefit each other, and we can, the great anarchist philosophy of mutual aid, the idea that we get ahead by helping each other and sharing, I strongly believe in.
The book places a lot of focus on anti-colonialism as well, and you especially make the point that in the fight for Indigenous rights, animal rights, anti-discrimination, environmentalism, all of that all comes under the umbrella of anti-colonialism. And a term I've heard a lot is decolonizing yourself, which is like reducing the ways under which you live under colonialism. What are some ways that listeners could perhaps start to do that if they'd like to?
Well, this is totally possible, Max. I mean, the thing about it is, it's easy to say the word decolonisation and just keep being the colonialists so many of us are.
Exactly.
I don't believe we have to be. I believe that, we live in communities where there are constant dynamics between people being more colonised and others who are being more colonising. And what we do collectively is surely, in terms of wealth distribution or redistribution, there's a bit of ethics redistribution, the morality redistribution that has to go on at times as well, I think, in the sense that we all, as humans, we all have, to my mind, the same rights. We have the rights to life. We have the rights to, to live as decently as we can without imposing on others. The basic human rights. We all have those. But we also have, I do believe, the right to expect of ourselves and of others a kind of understanding that that difference is best accommodated, and we all have the right to be different. The difference is best accommodated by allowing other people space to be different. And one of the problems with ongoing colonialism, and we do live in a world of ongoing colonialism, I articulate that in the book in many ways. I believe we are a colonial country. I believe we live in a world that is very much about colonizing dynamic, one that needs to be addressed constantly. And there are ways we can get around this just in our normal interactions, and that's to realise any benefit we have in life that somehow lifts us above others has come at the expense of someone else. And it may not seem obvious, but it has. And that doesn't, I'm not suggesting that people have to be at the point where they're having a crisis and, getting horrifically depressed because they feel they're exploiting others just by being. I'm not saying that at all. I mean, cherish life. It's really worth keeping. It's really worth having. It's great, and it should be great. We're making it very ungreat for everyone, but it doesn't need to be that way. And I think the simple principle in terms of the decolonising spirit is to be aware that everything you're getting that makes you feel more comfortable, materially especially, but also ethically, has probably cost someone else something somewhere morally or ethically. So you take, for example, speaking self-critically, I've been a vegan now for 34 years, and pretty well I would like to think that has meant less impact on animals, certainly, less impact on the environment, damaging impact, and less damaging impact on people. But I also have to be aware that there's something rising I call the new vegan consumerism. And people will buy a vegan product and not think about the fact that, the palm oil in it might have come from the destruction of a vast jungle.
It's still based in exploitation of some kind.
Yes. And so then you need to nuance the way you choose what so you're eating vegan, you need to choose to eat vegan in a certain way. You constantly need to be self-critical. And you never, the moment you'll think you're holier than thou and that you're ethically superior or ethically doing a better job than the guy down the road, then something's gone radically wrong, and you've become just what I call, this is a term I use in a book I'm now writing on the brownfield and greenfield sites and stuff, camouflaging. you're camouflaging your own ethics and your own ethical culpability. And it's very, very easy. So within the World Climate Environment Movement, fantastic people out there doing great work, really trying to bring, the world's attention to the crisis. But you have to be careful in this that you don't suddenly start camouflaging your own rapacities and behaviours by being an activist who's being activist to the public, but privately still just being the same old consumer. So I'll call that camouflaging, and it has a military overtone because so often these things are militarized and become weaponized because they're used by companies, they're used by governments and so on to manipulate the way people's attitudes are controlled. And so there's constantly, you need to have an awareness of how what you're doing might be misused, and also to be aware that the more contradictions you have in what you're doing are going to ultimately feed the kind of forces of rapacity that you're opposing. So decolonisation, to my mind, personal decolonising, the act of decolonising on the personal, is being aware of the hypocrisies and being aware that you have to, never think yourself, suddenly having got to a point where you're better than, or because you never are. Which one never is. It's an ongoing thing, and we have to change and adapt and understand others around us. We are actually all in this together. We're all different, and we all have the rights of difference, but we are all mutual as well. And that really matters. And I think, like memoir is a funny thing, isn't it? Because it's like on one level an ego trip. It's talking about the self, but at the same time it's talking about people, and it's talking to the reader. And so what makes this memoir different, I think, from my other memoirs, and it is trying to be a memoir about discussions around the ethics of living and your relationship to place, without trying to tell someone else what their relationship to place is, because I don't know that. I only know my own, and that I'm uncertain about. So,
Before we wrap up, you did mention that you've been a vegan for, I think, 34 years, you said.
34 years, yeah.
So as somebody who is very conscious of minimizing their impact on the environment and everything like that, with all that in mind, do you have a particular favorite vegan recipe that you could share with the listeners?
Well, I tell you what, if you want vegan recipes, on our blog Mutually Said, especially early on, my partner, Tracy Ryan, poet and novelist, and also very long time, I think she's been a vegan for 25 years or something, or thereabouts. She used to put a lot of recipes up, and I did this article for The Conversation last year on living vegan for 33 years as an ethical vegan for 33 years, and looking at the shifts in the new veganism and talking and there's a recipe on there that apparently the people who ran the article, The Conversation, said seems to have really appealed to people, and people have actually written and asked for the recipe. But that's so at The Conversation, if you go in and just, vegan ethics, John Kinsella, 33 years vegan, you'll find it, and you'll see a picture of the dish on there, which apparently proved very popular. That is some of my favourite vegan food. As I said, my partner is, she sort of made an investigation of nutrition and veganism for the last quarter of a century because of raising children. We've raised our children vegan, and the article looks at the ethics of raising children vegan and what choice and all these sort of issues. That's what it's sort of discussing. Like our son, who's 17 now, is very much a person of his own mind, and his veganism is very self-determined, and he is what he is because he chooses to be, and he's very articulate in how he sits in relationship to the world, and whether people say, oh, well, you were raised that you didn't have a choice, and as he points out, well, you didn't have a choice how you were raised either. Exactly, you get to a point where you make your own choice. Well, he's made his own choice that's the way he wants to be. That's fine. This is all about mutual respect. Everyone's got their own journeys, and I respect that too. It's the joy of actually trying to do something because you feel strongly and passionately about it, and that you actually really care what you're feeding people and what people are eating and so on. And like when I grow vegetables, I feel passionately about that as well. It's all about the kind of caring process. So the meals I've liked best are the meals where I feel that whoever's cooked them, if they're done with care and compassion for the people eating them and the origins of the foodstuffs, then that, for me, is a great vegan meal.
Oh, absolutely. Well, John, thanks so much for joining us today.
Yeah, no worries, Max. I've enjoyed it.
Displaced, A Rural Life is published by Transit Lounge and is available on our website at goodreadingmagazine.com.au or any good bookshop.